Hey folks, welcome back. So we've seen how to create a box plot manually. Now let's see how to make Tableau. Create one or even a whole set of box plots for us. I'm going to do this with my serial data set again. So have that data set opened up here. And that was the one I just created. So let me show you the steps to get through to do it. So again, I'm going to work with the calories per serving field. So I'll double click on that just to bring it in. Then notice, of course, what we're getting is the sum of all the calories per serving for all of our different cereals. So with the box plot, I'm usually looking at the distribution of individual values. So I'm going to come in and uncheck my aggregate measures to get the disaggregated values. Now, one thing you might wonder about is I know I've got 77 different cereals that are in this data set, but I don't have 77 different circles showing different values. Well, that's because some of the values are repeated. So, for example, the 70 calories per serving cereal, if we look at the data for that, we can see there's two different cereals, All Bran and 100% Bran, that have 70 calories per serving. Here at 100 calories per serving, if we look at the data for that value, you can see we've actually got 17 rows, so 17 different cereals, including Corn Flakes and Frosted Mini Wheats, have exactly 100 calories per serving. So you've got some multiple occurrences of some of these values in this data set. All right, but once I've got my data disaggregated, then I'll go to Show Me and bring this in a little bit so we can see it, and I can select my box and whiskers plot. And so that is going to convert the plot we were looking at from just a dot plot that was showing individual circles for the values to a box and whiskers plot. And so let's take a look at this. So first of all, we see a box in the middle. Now in this case, our box is not segmented. Remember in the one that we created with the experimental data previously, we divided this box into two different segments at the median. With this data, that's not happening because if you take a look at the actual values for the median, the upper hinge, and the lower hinge, and you can see those if you just mouse over the box, notice that the median and the upper hinge are both 110. So the upper hinge represents the third quartile. The median, of course, is the value right in the middle. The lower hinge is the first quartile. So what that's telling us is that 50% of the data, or well, 25% of the data between the median and the upper hinge all have the exact same value. They're all cereals that have 110 calories per serving. So we've got a lot of kind of clumpy data right in the middle of this distribution. And remember our histogram that we had created previously? It was also showing a whole lot of values in that 110 calories per serving. So what we're seeing here with this box plot is consistent with what we saw in the histogram. All right, so here is our box plot. And again, data is fairly symmetric. We have about as many high values as we do low values. But again, this becomes more interesting when we really want to break it down by different, some sort of different category. So I'm going to bring in manufacturer and drop that into the columns shelf. Now what I've got is I've got a separate box plot for the cereals from each of the manufacturers. And then it becomes interesting, of course, to start to compare them. So again, I'm going to start with the ones on the right, and then we'll look at these slightly funky looking ones on the left here. So now what you see, let's take a look at Ralston Purina, because that's the one where it's sort of easiest to see. Now you see that the box that's representing that middle 50% of the data is in two shades, kind of a light gray and a dark gray. And that's because as you mouse over this and you see the values, the upper hinge, which represents the upper edge of that box, is at 130 calories per serving. The lower hinge, which represents the lower edge of that box, is at 100 calories per serving. And then the place where the color changes here, that's the median, and that's at 110 calories per serving. So when you see those two colors, what that's doing is that's splitting this box into the median up to the third quartile or the upper hinge, and then the median down to the first quartile or the lower hinge. So this is starting to look like a fairly normal, a fairly typical box and whiskers plot. And then of course our whiskers go out to the adjacent values that are adjacent to the inner fence, the upper inner fence, and the lower inner fence. And for Ralston Purina, we don't have any outlying values beyond those adjacent values. So yeah, Ralston Purina, relatively symmetric it looks like, maybe a little bit of skew to the right, because our upper whisker is longer and the upper half of our box here is longer than the lower half and the lower whisker. So we have some skew to the right, but reasonably normal, or reasonably symmetric. I'm going to come over here. If we look at Kellogg's, Kellogg's is also fairly symmetric, although it looks like if Kellogg's has some skew, it's going down to the left or to the lower values. And again, by looking at the relative proportions of those boxes and where the whiskers are stretched out to, that's how I'm making that determination. Nabisco is pretty darn symmetric. And it looks like our median and our upper hinge both have the same values, and the lower hinge is not far away. So very symmetric there. Post, definitely skewed to the left. And in fact, our high value for post is at 120, which is at the same, so our upper whisker and our upper hinge are at the same value for post. Same thing is going on with Quaker Oats. This one is definitely skewed to the left. Neither post nor Quaker Oats really has an upper whisker because it's right there at the same location as the upper hinge, but they both have lower whiskers, showing that they have some lower calorie values in theirs. All right, so that's just kind of interpreting these. The other thing I would say is, we can kind of see it looks like in terms of being overall having the most number of offerings that are lower calories per serving, looks like Nabisco is kind of right down there at the bottom. Quaker Oats is also relatively low, but its higher values are comparable to the other manufacturers' higher values. So that's those kind of 5 fairly reasonable looking box plots. What's going on with these guys over here, these 2 on the left, American Home Foods and General Mills? Well, with American Home Foods, let's go ahead and click on that data value and look at the data. And what we see is we actually only have one product from American Mills. It's this Mapo something cereal. I guess it's just called Mapo. It's a hot cereal with 100 calories per serving. But that's the only American Home Foods product we have in our data set. And so that's why we're seeing really just a dot with a line, is because there's only one value. And if you mouse over that dot, you can see, I've got to get my cursor just in exactly the right spot. You can see that all the values for all the different components of our box and whiskers plot have exactly the same number, because there's only one number in that subset of the data. So if you see that circle with a line through it in a box and whiskers plot, you've only got one value, or one value which may occur, or one value that's repeated. All right, over here with General Mills, we have a similar kind of thing going on. Here we've got a whole lot of values that are 110. All right, so if I click on that 110 dot and look at the data there, looks like we've got 13 different General Mills cereals that all have 110 calories per serving. All right, and then just a few others that are different from that. But those 13 that are represented by that one blue dot really kind of overwhelm everything else. So, it looks like they've got one cereal, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, that has 120 calories per serving. And if we were to go up to these other dots, we would see similar kinds of data. 2 cereals that have 130 calories per serving, and then only one Total Raisin Bran that has 140 calories per serving. So the 13 dots down here represent not only the middle 50% of the data, but even more a greater proportion of the data than that. So they kind of overwhelm the other values. And so again, on this one, it works out so that the median, the first quartile, the third quartile, and all the whiskers, both whiskers, fall within those 13 values that are all 110 calories per serving. All right, so that's what's going on there. All right, the one other thing I'd like to do here is remember in the box plots that we created by hand, it's always nice to have the average or the arithmetic mean showing up in here just as a point of reference. And Tableau allows us to do that. The way I'll do it is I'll come to the Analytics tab, and I need to bring in a reference line. So when I pull the reference line over, I've got the option of a couple different ways to add it in. If I add it in for the whole table, just by dropping it on that area, what I'm going to get is I'm going to get a line that represents the grand mean of all of my data. And I'm going to go ahead and make it a kind of an orange line just so it sort of stands out in all that gray and blue. And then on the label, well, let me go ahead and just click OK here, and I'll show you what I get. So what I get is I get this orange line that represents the overall mean for calories per serving for all 77 cereals. Happens to be about 106.88, right? Mouse over it, you can see that. And it runs, right through all my box and whiskers plot. Now, if I'm looking to compare manufacturers to the overall average, this can be helpful to me, right? So I can see that Kellogg's is very evenly divided about that average. Nabisco is completely below the average, whereas General Mills is mostly above the average, right? So you can start to make some of those comparisons. But if I want to get that average for each of the manufacturer subgroups, then I want to do it differently. So if I click the line and choose Edit, then what I can do is I can choose to have the line shown per pane. I actually don't have separate panes in this visualization in this table. I've only got one pane because I only have one dimension in columns. But I can also go per cell, and what that will do is the cells are represented by the individual manufacturers. And so if I move that to the right, you can see then I get an average line per cell. Now, one thing is we're looking at that, we've got the word average showing up on every one of them, which starts to look very messy. And so I can fix that by adjusting the label here for my reference line. I'm going to take it from showing the computation, which is an average computation, to just a label of none, and then go ahead and click OK. And now what I've got is a nice average reference line to compare to help me sort of figure out which of these values are left skewed, right skewed, positively skewed, negatively skewed, based on comparing those averages to the medians. And we can certainly see that here. We can see that for Ralston Purina, our mean is above the median, greater than the median, so we have some positive skew going on with that one. Of course, we'd already made that observation just by looking at the box and whiskers plot before. We definitely see some left skew or some negative skew going on with Quaker Oats. Its outlying values are in the lower end of the range, and we can make similar observations across the others as well. This is showing your box and whiskers plots vertically like this is kind of the default, but sometimes it can also be helpful to look at them horizontally. That might make it easier to make some of these comparisons, so you can kind of play around with both and see which one works better there. All right, so I am going to go ahead and stop this video here, and we will wrap things up with one more after this. See you there.